Hey there. Looks like someone's ready to dive into some real-time data. We've got a stack of info here on Debezium. I have to say, it's pretty exciting stuff.
Yeah, the whole world of real-time data is really fascinating. It's amazing how much things have changed. It wasn't that long ago that we were totally fine with batch updates, just getting info trickling in, once a day or even less often.
Yeah, but now it's like everyone needs insights right away. It's like the faster business moves, the faster data has to move.
That's exactly it. It's like the speed of business has become the speed of data, and that's where change data capture, or CDC, really comes into play.
Okay, so CDC is all about tracking and capturing those changes to a database as they're happening, right?
Right.
Instead of taking those old school snapshots every few hours, it's like getting a live feed of events.
It's
telling us exactly what changed, when it changed, and how it changed.
Yep, that's the core idea. It's like having, imagine a dedicated observer, someone meticulously documenting every single interaction with your data. And that's where Debezium comes in.
Okay, I'm with you.
It's an open source platform, and it's kind of like a bridge. It connects your database and Apache Kafka, tuning those database changes into events that Kafka can distribute. It can send them anywhere you need them.
Uh-huh. So that's why Kafka keeps popping up in everything I've been reading about CDC. So the powerhouse behind the scenes,
Yeah, you could say that.
making sure that all this real-time data is flowing smoothly. But I'm kind of curious about something. Every database has its own little quirks and ways of doing things. How does Debezium handle all of that?
It's true. Databases can be all over the place, but one of Debezium's strengths is that it's incredibly versatile.
Okay, good to know.
It supports a huge range of popular databases, things like MySQL, PostgreSQL, even MongoDB.
Oh, wow, so it covers a lot of ground.
It does, even Oracle and SQL Server. And what's really impressive is that it doesn't just connect to these databases, it really understands them.
Okay, I like where this is going.
Debezium connectors are designed to be super efficient. They actually read the database's transaction logs.
What are those exactly?
Think of them like detailed chronicles of every change in the database. And they do it without putting a ton of strain on the database itself.
Okay, so it's like having a translator that's fluent in both database and Kafka.
That's a great analogy.
I'm starting to get the big picture.
Yeah.
But walk me through the process a bit. Let's say I have, like a MySQL database I want to keep an eye on with Debezium. What are the actual steps involved?
Okay, good question. It's actually a pretty straightforward process. Imagine it in 3 steps. First, you set up a Debezium connector specifically for MySQL.
Got it.
This connector is essentially an agent. It knows how to communicate with MySQL, it understands its structure, and it knows how to extract all the relevant information about each change that happens.
So it's like plugging in a special extension that teaches Kafka how to speak MySQL.
Exactly.
Okay, what's next?
Step 2 is where that connector goes to work. It starts parsing the MySQL transaction log.
Parsing.
Basically, it carefully analyzes the log, identifies the type of change. Was it an insert, an update, a delete?
Next.
It figures out what data was involved and any other important details like timestamps or user information.
It's like extracting the important signal from all the noise.
That's a good way to put it.
Okay, and what happens to all that information once it's been extracted?
That's when the real-time magic happens. All those changes get transformed into structured events.
Okay, we're listening.
They're usually formatted in a way that's easy for other systems to understand, like JSON. And then these events are published to a Kafka topic.
And that is?
It's basically a designated channel within Kafka. It's where the data can be accessed by any application that needs it.
I see. So I'm picturing this conveyor belt of events flowing from MySQL. They're going through Debezium and then landing in Kafka, ready to be used. But doesn't that create like a whole new set of challenges? Managing these streams of data and making sure everything stays consistent.
Oh, absolutely. Those are big considerations. And that's where some of Debezium's more advanced features come in. Things like schema evolution. Databases are always changing, right?
Yeah, that's the real world for you.
New columns get added. Data types change.
And that can create a lot of chaos in a real-time environment, I imagine.
It can, but Debezium has a clever way to handle it.
What does it do?
It's not just capturing data changes, it's also tracking and publishing any changes to the database schema itself.
Okay, so it's like a self-updating map.
That's a great way to think about it. So
Yeah.
any system that's receiving these events can adapt on the fly. They don't crash or misinterpret the data.
That's incredibly important, especially when you think about how big these real-time data pipelines can get. We need a system that can handle a lot of information without breaking down.
Right, and that's another area where Debezium's integration with Kafka really shines. It leverages Kafka's inherent fault tolerance and scalability.
So those benefits carry over to Debezium as well.
They do. You can trust it to handle tons of data, maintain its performance even under pressure, and recover gracefully from any issues that might pop up.
That's a lot of peace of mind. So we have a system that can adapt to changes, handle tons of data, and stay reliable even when things go wrong. Pretty impressive.
Yeah.
But what about connecting to other tools and systems? Is Debezium stuck in the Kafka world?
Not at all. Actually, one of the things that makes Debezium so powerful is its ability to integrate with a whole bunch of tools, both within the Kafka world and beyond.
Really? I'm intrigued.
For example, it works really well with Kafka streams.
What's that?
It's a powerful framework for processing those streams of change events in real time.
Okay, I see.
Imagine being able to filter, transform, or aggregate data on the fly. You could extract valuable insights and trigger actions.
All based on those insights.
Yeah.
So it's not just about capturing the changes, it's about using them to drive real-time decisions.
Exactly.
Powerful stuff.
And then there's KSQLDB. It lets you analyze those streams of data using queries that are a lot like SQL.
Wait, SQL on streaming data?
It is. It's really powerful.
That sounds incredibly useful.
It is. And of course, Debezium works with a whole range of Kafka Connect syncs too. These are components that are specifically designed to send data to other systems. Things like data warehouses, search indexes, or other applications.
Oh, wow. So if I wanted to take those changes happening in my database
Yeah.
and use them to instantly update a search index or trigger something in a totally different application, I could do that.
Absolutely. The possibilities are almost endless. And of course, there's the outbox pattern we talked about earlier. That's really helpful in microservices architecture.
Oh, yeah, microservices.
Yeah.
And the outbox pattern, I remember you mentioning that. Remind me, why is that pattern so important when we're talking about real-time data?
It's all about making sure everything stays consistent, especially in those complex, distributed environments. The outbox pattern helps to guarantee that database updates and event publishing, they happen together as one unit of work, so you don't have to worry about data getting out of sync across different parts of your system.
Ah, so it's like a safety net.
Yeah, you could say that.
It makes sure everything stays in sync, even with multiple services working on the same data.
Exactly.
Got it.
And finally, there's the topic of monitoring. With any real-time system, it's super important to be able to see what's going on. Debezium has built-in monitoring capabilities.
Oh, that's good.
Usually using JMX, which is a standard way to keep an eye on Java applications.
So it's like having a live dashboard showing you how your Debezium connectors are doing, how much data is flowing through, and whether there are any problems that need attention.
You got it. And the great thing is that you can integrate those monitoring capabilities with other tools, giving you even more comprehensive insights into your system.
That makes sense. Monitoring is crucial in any data environment, but especially when you're dealing with real-time data, where small issues can have big consequences.
I agree.
This is all incredibly fascinating. We've gone from a high-level overview of Debezium to understanding its core features and capabilities. I have to admit, I'm even more intrigued now than when we started, but I'm sure our listeners are ready to dig a little deeper into the specifics. Why don't we take a minute to break down some of those change events and then explore some real-world use cases where Debezium really shines?
It sounds like a plan.
Okay, so let's unpack those change events a bit more. You mentioned they contain a lot of information, but what kind of details are we actually talking about?
Imagine it's like each change event is a snapshot. It captures the whole story of a specific change. It tells you where the change happened, what type of change it was, and of course the actual data that was affected.
Okay, that makes sense. So it's not just a notification that, oh, something changed. It's a detailed record of exactly what happened.
Right.
Can you give me like an example?
Sure. Let's say you have a customer database.
Yeah.
And someone updates their address. The change event would include things like the specific database and table. It would say it was an update operation. And then it would show both the old address and the new address.
So you can see what changed.
It's
It's like a before and after picture of the data. Plus a timestamp and maybe who made the change.
You got it. And those timestamps are super important for figuring out the sequence of events. You can actually rewind and replay the changes to see how your data got to where it is now.
That's really helpful for understanding how the data is evolving over time.
Right.
Okay, so I'm starting to get a grasp on the structure of these change events
Right.
and the level of detail. But you talked about setting up connectors to capture these events. Does that mean I need a separate connector for every single table I want to monitor? That seems like a lot.
That's a great question, and thankfully, no. Debezium is much more flexible than that.
Okay, good.
You don't need a connector for every table.
So how does that work?
You can configure a connector to monitor a specific table, or a group of tables, or even an entire database schema.
So I have a lot of control over what changes I'm capturing and where those changes are being sent.
You do.
That's a relief. You've mentioned some really interesting use cases for Debezium, things like real-time data synchronization and event-driven architectures. Can you give me some specific scenarios where Debezium would be a good fit?
Of course. One of the most common uses is keeping a search index in sync with your database. Imagine you're running an e-commerce site
Okay.
with a huge catalog of products, and you want users to be able to search through all those products really easily.
Makes sense.
So you're using a search engine like Elasticsearch,
Right.
but the challenge is, how do you keep that search index up to date with your database?
Yeah, I've seen that problem before. Outdated search results are so frustrating.
Yeah.
And they can really hurt a business.
They can. In the past, you might have used batch updates to sync things up, but that means there's a delay. Your search results could be out of sync for hours.
Not good.
But with Debezium, you can do this in real time. So as soon as a product is added, updated, or removed from your database, Debezium captures that change.
Okay.
And that change is immediately used to update the Elasticsearch index.
That's incredibly powerful.
It is. And it's not just for search indexes. Think about any scenario where you need to keep different systems in sync, like a data warehouse, a cache, or even a completely separate application, anything that relies on real-time data from your database.
So Debezium provides that connection.
It does.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Real-time synchronization is definitely a huge benefit. But you also talked about event-driven architectures. What does that actually look like in practice?
Let's stick with our e-commerce example. Imagine you want to send a personalized notification to a customer whenever the price of their product they've added to their wish list goes down.
Okay, that's a great idea.
It's a great way to keep customers engaged and drive sales.
But how would you do that without constantly checking for price changes? Wouldn't that put a lot of strain on your system?
It would, but with an event-driven approach. Using Debezium, it becomes much easier.
How so?
When a product price is updated in the database, Debezium captures that change
Okay.
and sends it to Kafka. On the other end, you have an application that's specifically designed to handle these price change events.
So it's just waiting for that specific event to occur
Exactly.
instead of constantly checking for changes.
And as soon as that event arrives, the application takes action. It can check if the product is on anyone's wish list and then trigger those personalized notifications right away.
So no more resource-intensive polling or batch processes.
Right.
This event-driven approach seems like it could be applied to so many things. It's all about reacting to specific changes as they happen, instead of trying to predict what might change.
That's a good way to think about it.
It's like setting up a series of tripwires.
Each one triggering a specific action when a certain event happens.
Exactly.
It's a much more efficient and scalable way to build reactive systems. And since Debezium is taking care of capturing and delivering those events, you can focus on building the logic that responds to them.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, we've talked about real-time synchronization and event-driven architectures. What other compelling use cases are there? You mentioned audit logging and compliance before.
Oh, right.
I can see how that would be important, but how does Debezium fit into that?
Let's say you're working in a highly regulated industry, like finance or healthcare.
Great.
And you're required to track every change made to certain sensitive data, maybe customer financial transactions or patient medical records.
Yeah, I can definitely see why a detailed audit trail would be crucial in those situations.
It is. And that's where Debezium's ability to capture a complete history of changes is so valuable.
Yeah.
By monitoring the tables that contain that sensitive data, Debezium can create a stream of change events representing every single modification.
So it's like a real-time, continuously updating audit trail.
Exactly.
That's a huge win for compliance and security.
It is. And it's not just about meeting regulations. It's also about understanding how your data is being used and catching any potential problems early on.
So you can see if anything looks suspicious.
Right.
Or figure out what happened if something goes wrong.
Exactly.
I'm starting to realize that the real power of Debezium isn't just about capturing these change events. It's about using those events to drive all sorts of actions and insights.
I agree.
But I'm sure there are some challenges involved as well. What are some of the things that people might struggle with when implementing Debezium?
That's a great question. And there are definitely some things to keep in mind. One of the biggest challenges is ensuring data consistency, especially when you're working with multiple systems and complex data flows.
Right, we talked about the outbox pattern. Are there other things to consider?
Absolutely. One important concept is exactly once delivery.
What's that?
It means making sure that each change event is only processed one time by any downstream systems.
Makes sense.
If an event is accidentally processed twice, you could end up with duplicate data or incorrect calculations.
That sounds like a big headache.
It can be.
So it's not just about capturing the changes, it's about making sure they're delivered and processed correctly, without any errors or duplication.
Exactly. And achieving that in a distributed system can be tricky, but there are tools and techniques that can help.
So it's a challenge, but a solvable one?
It is.
Okay, good to know.
And that's just one example of the things you need to think about when you're working with real-time data. Another important area is handling schema changes.
Right, we talked about how Debezium can track and publish those changes, but what about the systems that are consuming those events?
They need to be able to adapt as well.
Of course.
If the schema changes in the source database, any system that's using that data needs to be able to understand and process those changes without breaking down.
So it's a team effort.
It is.
It's not just about Debezium handling schema changes. It's about making sure all the systems in your data pipeline can evolve together.
Exactly.
Okay. Data consistency and schema evolution are definitely two big things to consider. Any other advice you'd give to someone who's starting out with Debezium?
One of the most important things is to make sure you're monitoring everything when you're dealing with real-time data. It's crucial to have visibility into how your pipelines are performing.
So we can see what's going on.
Right.
Are there any bottlenecks? Are events being processed quickly enough? Are there any errors?
Exactly. It's like a health checkup for your data pipeline.
To make sure everything is running smoothly.
And to catch any potential problems before they turn into big issues.
Right.
Debezium has built-in monitoring through JMX, so you can keep track of things like the number of events captured, the latency of your pipelines, and any errors that might be happening.
Okay, so we can really keep an eye on things.
And you can integrate Debezium with other monitoring tools too, like Prometheus or Grafana.
To get even more insights.
Exactly.
That makes a lot of sense. Monitoring is so important, especially when you're talking about real-time data, where even small hiccups can have big consequences.
They can.
Okay, so monitoring is key. Any other tips?
Start small and iterate.
What do you mean?
Don't try to solve every problem at once.
Okay. Choose a specific use case. Experiment with Debezium and see how it fits into your existing systems.
To take a gradual approach.
Exactly. Start with a specific problem, build a solution, and then learn from that experience before moving on to the next challenge.
That's great advice.
And the great thing is that Debezium is very well documented, and there's a really supportive community behind it.
That's good to hear.
So don't be afraid to reach out and ask questions, or share your experiences with others who are also working with real-time data.
Sounds like a great combination. A powerful technology and a helpful community. This has been a really eye-opening deep dive into Debezium. We've covered a lot of ground, from the basics of change data capture to real-world use cases, and even some of the challenges involved in managing real-time data pipelines. But I have one more question. We've been focusing on capturing changes from databases, but what about the future? Do you see Debezium expanding beyond databases to capture changes from other types of data sources? That's a fantastic question, and it's something that the Debezium community is definitely thinking about. While the focus right now is on databases, the basic principles of change data capture could be applied to many other types of data sources.
Like what?
Things like message queues, file systems, APIs, even real-time data streams from IoT devices.
Wow, the possibilities are huge. If Debezium could capture changes from all those sources, it would open up a whole new world of real-time data integration and analysis.
It would. Imagine being able to track changes to a configuration file, or monitor the state of a message queue, or analyze data coming from sensors in a connected car.
All in real time.
Exactly.
This is all so exciting. I can't wait to see how Debezium evolves and what new use cases emerge.
Me too.
But before we get too carried away with the future, how about we give our listeners some practical advice? If they're ready to start experimenting with Debezium, where should they go for resources and guidance?
The Debezium website is a great place to start. It's got tons of documentation, tutorials, and a blog to keep you up to date.
Sounds pretty comprehensive. What about for people who want to go a bit deeper? Maybe contribute to the project or really understand the code?
The Debezium GitHub repository is where all the action is. You can see the source code, how it all works, and even contribute your own improvements.
That's awesome. It's great to see such an active open source community, but real-time data can be pretty intimidating. Any advice for someone who might feel a bit overwhelmed?
My advice would be to start small. Don't try to do everything at once.
Okay, good advice.
Pick a small use case that makes sense for you. Maybe it's synchronizing a table with a search index, or building a simple event-driven workflow. Get that one thing working really well, and then build from there.
So break it down into manageable pieces.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to experiment. Try different configurations, different connectors. See how Debezium behaves in your environment.
The more you experiment, the more comfortable you'll become.
That's right. And remember, the Debezium community is very supportive. There are forums, mailing lists, chat rooms. You can connect with other users, ask questions, share your experiences.
That's great. It's always helpful to have a community to lean on. This has been a fantastic deep dive into Debezium and real-time data. We've learned so much about change data capture, explored real-world use cases, and talked about some of the challenges involved.
It's been great. And the most exciting thing is that this is just the beginning. The field of real-time data is constantly evolving, and Debezium is right at the forefront.
It feels like we're on the edge of a real-time revolution, where data isn't just a static asset, but a dynamic force that's driving decisions and actions in real time.
That's a great way to put it. And as more organizations embrace this shift, I think we're going to see a huge wave of innovation with new applications that leverage the power of real-time data to create truly amazing experiences.
I'm excited to see what the future holds. To our listeners, I encourage you to explore Debezium. You might be surprised at what you can achieve when you tap into the power of change.
I agree.
This has been a fantastic deep dive into the world of Debezium and real-time data.
It has.
Thanks for joining us. And until next time, keep diving deep.